Richard Modiano, and I'll reuse a joke that I used with Neil Aiken a few weeks ago, which is you have so many credits and accolades. It's kind of like trying to cherry pick from Christopher Lee's IMDb. There's just so much that I have to kind of just move stuff around here. So first of all, welcome to the show. So glad to have you on here. And how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well, Eric. It's good to see you.
Oh, good to be seen. Good to see your face as well. It's been several years, I think.
Yeah, it has.
It's been a while since I've been over to Beyond Baroque. How's it going over there these days?
Well, I am now the director emeritus, and I am not directly connected with Beyond Baroque anymore, although I have read there a couple of times since then. And right now, events are in person and on Zoom simultaneously. There is masking required, health precautions are still in place. All events are free now.
Oh,
There's
wow.
no there's no ticketing. Excepting workshops, but readings are all free. And the best way to support Beyond Baroque these days is to become a member, and you can find
Uh,
that out. You can join online, or if you go in person, or if you attend a Zoom reading, you can find out how to do that.
Excellent. That was going to be my next question is how the money's coming in to kind of keep that going. I remember the founding of the bookstore for, Scott Wanberg bookstore. And how is that working out? I mean, you're still getting new work from poets and authors
Well,
to
the when I was director, the policy was in order to keep expenses down, we only ordered books of people who were reading.
ah
And occasionally, well, as far as used books go, there are still donations. We get a lot of art books from a particular artist who is a supporter of Beyond Baroque, and Ed Ruscha, that's the guy. So Ed Ruscha donates a lot of art books that are ordinarily limited editions, very costly. So the used section is always being replenished, but newly published works, it doesn't function as an ordinary bookstore. Instead, anything new in there will be as a result of somebody giving a reading. And so we have the books of the readers, but otherwise, there are no new orders.
Okay, well, that's good to know. And I guess let the folks watching kind of let people know what you've been up to in the last few years. I know you've been part of a few anthologies that have been published, so I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of platform here to talk about those because I know our whole world has been kind of shaken apart here by COVID in the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, the anthology, the current anthology that I am in with a number of other outstanding California poets, both past and present, is called Beat Not Beat, and that is edited by Rich Ferguson, S.A. Griffin, and Alexis Rohn Fancher, and a final editor whose name I've forgotten. But this anthology had its pre-launch reading at Skylight Books earlier this month. The Because of supply chain problems, the book wasn't ready then, but it has since been published and it now exists physically. And there are going to be a series of other readings here in Los Angeles. The next one is going to be at Stories Books. I forget the date, but it's coming up. I believe it's November 10th at Stories Books. And it's going to be some of the readers. There's going to be a reading in the San Francisco Bay Area on November 20th, and that's going to have some more readers. But this anthology is as many California poets as could be fit in. It actually should have a volume two because there were a lot of great people that didn't make it into this first one. But we have people like we have Diane DePrima, who's passed on, and Philip Lamantia, another poet that's passed on, Bob Kaufman, Gary Snyder, who's still with us, Peter Coyote, who's also still with us. A lot of great poets in there, Iris Berries, and there. So that's the current anthology that poets should be looking into. Other anthologies that I was in, well, there was one called COVID Artists Respond to the Pandemic, published by Finishing Line Press. And I was a co-editor on this with Rafael Alvarado and Consuelo Flores. And that had poets from all over the country. And it's a pretty diverse anthology. Plus, it's illustrated. There are a lot of nice color photographs and illustrations in that one. And there is yet another one published by Kalpna Chitnis. I forget her publishing imprint, but that is also a COVID-related anthology that's good. I mean, viewers you'll have to search that out. But yeah, that's what's been happening in terms of anthologies. And later this year, Punk Hostage Press will be publishing my own book, which is called The Forbidden Lunchbox, which is a collection of poetry and flash fiction and a little bit of prose. So that is something that I'm looking forward to.
Were you working on that newer collection all through the lockdown and the pandemic, or did it start, were pieces older than that going back?
Well, it's pieces older than that. It's like, it's a collection of everything that I thought was worth preserving up to the beginning of 2020, which was, Iris proposed this to me. She's the publisher of Punk Hostage Press, Iris Berry. And she proposed this to me at the end of 2019. I prepared it, got it together, and I worked with a terrific editor, S.A. Griffin, good friend of mine, a wonderful poet, certainly a seminal Los Angeles poet. He's the editor of that. We worked on this and we handed it in later in 2020 when the pandemic was in full swing and everything's on lockdown. So it was delayed, as were a number of other projects by many people. So now it's finally appearing.
Well, I'm glad to hear that that's finally going to see the light of day. I guess, and I don't want to touch too much on things you've covered a million times in other interviews, but I'm always curious to hear early influences. So I guess take me back to maybe the first time you can remember someone talking to you about poetry, or just, hey, you need to check this out, or you need to come to this cafe or this reading or this happening, or just something that you knew was going on in the community around you when you were younger, and you went and you saw and you said, I want to be a part of that.
Well, originally, like most people of my generation, I heard about poetry in school, in middle school. We read the classic English language poets. It was, of course, fairly conservative. Nobody made it past Robert Frost. Let's put it. The cutoff was Robert Frost. So from the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century, and then the 20th century only went as far as Robert Frost. But outside of that, when I was older in high school, there was a Bob Dylan album that came out that had the lyrics printed on the back. I forget the name of the album now. But I read that. I said, this is poetry. Sure, this is poetry for sure. And this frees, or at least it freed me to consider poetry more broadly. And from there, I connected with Allen Ginsberg, with the Beats, and I sort of followed that lead. But as far as learning about poetry from a poet, there used to be a bookstore in the San Fernando Valley across the street from Valley Community College called, what was it called now? But the Dialogue Bookshop. The Dialogue Bookshop. It was a small bookshop. They had a coffee urn in there, and they had a bulletin board. And it was within walking distance of where I lived at the time. And I used to go to that bookstore all the time. I was in high school. I was about 16 years old. And I went there and I saw a flyer for a poetry reading that featured a couple of poets, including Charles Bukowski. Now, I knew who Bukowski was from reading his columns in the Free Press. He had a column in the Free Press called Notes of a Dirty Old Man. And these columns were later collected and published by City Lights, but it actually started in another underground paper, Open City, that folded, and then Bukowski went over to the Free Press. So I read his column since then. I had no idea what he looked like, and I only knew about him through his column and through a couple of books that I saw at Dialogue Books. And one was Crucifix and a Death Hand, and a couple of broadsides published by Black Sparrow Press. So I went to this reading. It was in Silver Lake, and it was in a private residence. I walked in. There were some people gathered, and there was a piano in the room. And I was given a friendly greeting. There was a very large man who was the host, who turned out to be John Thomas. So this was at John Thomas's place. Of course, I knew little about the people there except for Bukowski. But there was this one guy who was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. Next to him was a Webcore reel-to-reel tape recorder that was plugged into the receptacle next to him. And he had a 6-pack of Brew 102 beer between his legs. Now, Brew 102 beer was a very, very cheap Los Angeles beer. I think it was like $1.50 for a 6-pack back then.
Wow.
But he was, drinking and paying attention. And then some of the poets read, and then John Thomas announced, our next reader is Charles Bukowski. So this is going to be good. Well, the guy sitting on the floor put his beer down, turned on the tape recorder, pressed the button, and we listened to Bukowski's pre-recorded poems. And he just kept drinking, and then it was over, pressed the button again. After the reading, I went up to him, and I said, Mr. Bukowski, what does it take to be a good poet? And he looked up at me. He was still sitting on the floor, and I was stooped over. And he looked up at me and he said, kid, you have to learn how to drive all the horses at once. And it took me a while to figure out what that was, but ultimately, I guess that it's all of the elements that go into a poem. There's a taxonomy that I think Ezra Pound came up with, where he talked about the ideas, the images, and the music. And the ideas are embodied in the images, and the images are carried by the music. So if you bring all of those three things together in perfect harmony, then you've got a good poem. And that's sort of an ideal. But in practice, some people excel at one and not at the others. I mean, now we mostly write in free verse. So the thing that sort of gets left behind in free verse is the music. So, the images and the ideas carry it along, but it's a kind of challenge to put that music back into it without resorting to the old familiar sing-song rhymes, which they just don't work anymore.
Right.
So that's really a challenge, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. I remember starting out and being, influenced by song lyrics. And I think that just as being a young person, and that was my main avenue of, hearing a radio or an album or something and wanting to emulate that, and then writing my own things and them being on paper to myself thinking, this is amazing. And then even reading it to a small group of friends thinking, this is dog shit. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, what? And it's exactly what you're saying. I'm like, well, when you hear a song, you're hearing a song. You're not just hearing the one element or the one horse, as you were saying. So yeah, I was kind of curious about that and kind of wanted to pick your brain about that particular, the beat generation. It was so entwined with jazz. Mm-hmm. And then we've kind of gotten away from that, like you were saying. And I don't know that, it's ever really gotten back to that. And, there's like the punk rock aesthetic, with
Hmm.
some things like your Patti Smith, people like that, Elvis Costello, but they do write their own poetry and have published their own poetry. But I don't feel like the music so much influenced what they were doing and when they were writing just the poetry on the page. And I don't know if it's ever gotten back to that with, modern music, house, techno, hip hop, maybe so much with the slam. When I hear slam poets, I definitely hear a beat. I definitely hear a rhythm. There's definitely a cadence. Um, but for me, I've never been, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I guess it's just I've never tried slam. I feel like if I did, it would just be inauthentic, forced, lame.
Yeah,
So, have you witnessed anything where the music's kind of coming back into it?
I've heard poetry that does have an internal rhythm. It does have a beat. Um, it it is it's nowadays. I think the way that it's accomplished is with the line breaks, so that you come to the end of a line and there is like a caesura. Well, not exactly a caesura, but there is like the final word of a particular line is emphasized, and then you go down to the next line, and then maybe the middle word is emphasized. There's a stress on that, and so it sort of works out like that. And very often, um, it's not uh, it's not calculated at the time of writing the way we are used to thinking of classical pre-free verse poetry, which was calculated with a rhyme scheme in mind
Right.
before it started. So it sort of emerges in the course of writing, and then in the course of editing, you take out a few words, you break the lines differently, and you sort of discover what kind of rhythm you have in that poem when you first wrote it, or you sharpen it up, or you sort of identify it and then extend it throughout the rest of the poem.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I remember in college just the curriculum being force-fed, Lord
Hmm.
Byron and Shelley, and I can appreciate it on a level of, well, this is amazingly crafted,
Yes,
but
it is.
it didn't really speak to me. But then there's the other stuff that I feel like kind of goes way to the point where it's trying to look like art on the page with the way the
Hmm.
words are placed, like an E. E. Cummings poem, where
Yeah.
it's always great to watch somebody try to read a Cummings poem in public and they haven't really read it, or I mean, not like they're just been handed it, but, and you can just, the eyes just are playing ping pong because it's like, and with the dusk and so that's kind of fun because it's just the way that the words are actually placed on the page. You're talking about line breaks, that's pretty extreme. Um, but yeah, I just do see a natural progression of people where music is definitely an influence, and then at a certain point, it just kind of goes away, and everybody just goes to free verse. I don't know. It's kind of tough to come back to that. I don't know if it's just we feel like going back that far, or it's like maybe people think it's backward thinking, like it's too precious, too corny, and then to do it's just tough, man. I feel like, and maybe you do the same thing. I just got to get it out. I got to get it on the page, and whatever somebody else wants to call it, it's fine. But at least I know I got it out, and I'll sit with it for a couple days and come back to it and reshape it. But um I'm kind of curious, do you have any recollection of a poem that maybe you wrote something 15, 20 years ago, found it either in an old journal when you moved somewhere, or let's even say like a USB or something just buried between tax documents or something, and you found it and you went, when you wrote it, you either thought, this is great, I can't wait to, incorporate this, or what usually happens was, man, I thought this was great. It is so not great. And oh, how do I resuscitate this?
Yeah, I've had that experience definitely. And I find that when I have found poems like that, the chief weakness is they are overwritten. there's too there's too much in them, and they can be saved by cutting. You
Right.
spare, you just you take out all of the dead parts and see how that works. And if necessary, you add some connective tissue.
Yeah, yeah. I find too that maybe you've had this happen too, where I don't know. I don't know what else to really call it. It's like a stress poem where it's just like, "Ugh, I gotta get this thing out, and I just write it, and it's just like verbal vomit. And I'm just like, oh, this is brilliant. This is getting it out of my system, and this is such a statement or whatever. And you look at it 2 weeks later, and you're like, this is a mess. This is what is this? It's like an amorphous blob, and I don't know. And I think that you were talking earlier about working with an editor, and as I've kind of progressed, I've kind of been more open to editors. I think when I was younger, I was just more, holding stuff close and not wanting anybody to come in and like, no, it's mine. How dare you? And so have you had really good experiences working with editors over the years?
I have, and basically nowadays I share poems with people that are friends and who are good poets whose judgment I trust. And since we are friends, they can say, Richard, this one sucks.
You need that. It is so important,
And without saying, oh, how dare you say that, but because I can say
I'll
the
have
same.
your head for this. Yeah, I mean, it's like you could be
But,
a
but
Roman emperor, but it's like you have to have someone who's not a yes man or a yes woman
yes,
come up to you
exactly.
and be like, you are too close to this. You are in the eye of the
Mhm.
hurricane. You are not seeing these moving parts around you. So,
Or else, they say, drop this line, put that stanza in the middle, things like that. They take, and I do it for them. Sometimes it doesn't need any work at all. They say, hey, I like it as is. So but what I wanted to say also is that when you send your poems to a magazine editor, they never tell you, "Oh, this sucks." They just politely reject it. They
right.
don't have time. They don't have time to say what's wrong with
Yeah.
it.
They're on to the next one, on to the next
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
So that's something that you have to live with. I know that it's some people are utterly crushed when they get a rejection, but that's the way it is. In fact, it all depends too on the sensibilities of the editor, so that you can send something to one zine and the editor politely says no thank you, send the same poem to another and they say that's great, we're going to use it. So
Yeah. Some of the most polite inspiring rejection letters I've gotten have been when they actually take the time. This rarely happens, maybe 3 or 4 times in my life when I've gotten a rejection. When you can tell the person it's not a form letter and it's an actual email that they wrote themselves, and they say, you know what, this isn't right for us, but I think maybe these 3 other journals, they might be interested. Maybe not as is, maybe it needs some tinkering, but this is more up their alley. And I've had some stuff published that way. And it's like, I'm always taken aback that someone really takes the time and wants you to succeed. Even if it's not for their magazine or their journal or their anthology, they're saying, this is good. It's not our thing, it's not our style, it's not what our theme is for the month or something. But I don't know if you've ever had that happen, but whenever that happens, I'm blown away.
yeah, I've had that happen a couple of times. Yeah, and it is encouraging. Yeah, it's very encouraging. I mean, one of the things that um, happens when you send out your work into the world is well, let's say that when your poem is printed in an online zine, a hard copy zine, or appears in an anthology, you no longer have control over it. In other words, people are going to understand it the way they understand it, and there's nothing you can do about that. You could say, "I didn't mean that," but no, it's. There's no way you don't know who the readers are. They could be in the tens, the hundreds, the thousands. You don't really know. and you have to be prepared to let your poem into the world and say bye. It's there, and they can make of it what they will, and they might like it, dislike it, understand it, or misunderstand it, or sometimes they can creatively misunderstand it and show you things in it that you didn't know were there. So
Yeah, one of the things that I've learned over the last few years about trusting editors, even though sometimes it's painful, is uh, even a recent poem that I wrote, and an editor, she said, "Why is this the first stanza? This should be in the middle or the last stanza." And it's like, well, that's how I wrote it. Well, you didn't write it wrong, but this is the way it should be. And it didn't make any sense. And then it's like you see it sent back to you and you go, oh, duh. As simple as that, where it's like it just took that other person to go, well, why did you do this? This is ridiculous. So so what's your experience like editing other people's work? Because you talked about that a little bit, and how precious are you? Where's the line? Where's the decorum before you're like, this is gonna ruin my friendship, or this person just needs to be told, and no one's gonna tell them, and I have to be the person to tell them this.
well, as an editor myself, I publish an occasional zine called Moon and Sun, and I curate basically the material that I print is something that I ask for specifically. It's somebody has sent me their poem as just an interesting exchange, or else they posted it on Facebook or Instagram, and if I see it and like it, I contact them and I say, has this been published anywhere? If the answer is no, then I say I will publish it in the next issue of my zine. So that's how I've worked in terms of right now I belong to a sort of a poetry group, for want of a better word. It's a few people. We exchange poems according to prompts, and each person we write a poem a day. So it's in that respect, it's kind of high pressured. But I find it useful to do that, because I'm obliged to come up with something, and they're not always good. One of the, we all know that we are not going to be turning out poems to our satisfaction, and we get a new partner each week. So you send your poem to your partner, and your partner looks at it and said, "Oh, this was done in haste." And I said, "Yes, it was. I couldn't think of anything to respond to this prompt, so this is what I came up with." So, well, it's a good try, Or I will say to them, "Why don't you just how would it be if you moved the first line of this stanza and make it the last line of the stanza that came before?" Try that and see how it works. So that's sort of like the way we relate to each other. We don't say, "You must do this," or "That wasn't." We say, "Give this a try," or we say, "I don't understand what you meant in this particular stanza," or you just went on. I think the first two stanzas seem to me to be a warm-up, and the poem really begins with the third stanza. So it's things like that. And also the challenge of working with prompts, not all of the prompts connect with you. I mean, it can't be helped. They don't inspire anything. So you just write to fit the prompt. And, you can tell those poems are sort of uninspired. But sometimes the prompts do resonate with you, and you come up with something good. And then you get to polish it, because you send it to your partner. Your partner says, "I like this, but I think it would be okay without that line," or put in another line about this or that, and you have a better poem. So
That's
yeah,
true.
I do enjoy this sort of thing.
Can you recall a time when someone showed you a book, lent you a book of poems, and maybe you delved into it, maybe didn't get anything out of it, and they just insisted, no, this is great. And then someone twisted your arm and said, well, this person is going to be at a reading such and such a place. And then it was only through them reading, them giving a performance of it that you suddenly went like, oh, I can see what they're saying now, or I get it now because you hear the inflection, you hear the humanity, you hear the passion. Has that happened before?
That has happened. Yes, that has happened. There were um, poems that I read that were, for want of a better word, technically well done, but they just didn't connect. I mean, I didn't hear the poet's voice until I actually heard the poet reading himself, and then I said, I get it now. I see where this guy is coming from, or where this woman is coming from, because now I can hear this, and I go back to the collection and I reread it, and I see, it's an entree. If you can hear the poet read, you really have an idea of what they are doing in their poem. And of course, now we have recordings of at least 20th century poets who have passed on, who passed on before we were alive, before we went to poetry readings, but we can hear them now, and through recordings. And of course, there are our contemporaries who we can hear in person at readings wherever we happen to be living. So, yeah. And by the way, now that things have opened up in the pandemic, it is good to go out and hear people read in person. It all depends. I mean, if you want to be cautious, sure, continue to wear a mask. It's no longer mandatory, but take whatever precautions and take a slight risk. If you wear a mask and you're worried about getting sick, wear your mask, go to the reading, keep your distance, but show up and you will have a good time. I guarantee it.
Yeah, I'm so grateful things are opening up again. Um, I'm also kind of glad I've talked to a few other poets that I've really seen, uh, even since the lockdown, maybe because people had more downtime, the return of the chapbook, which I think for like 5 or 10 years was just withering on the vine and people got away from it. And I don't know if new poets were just, they wanted their first book to be the Citizen Kane of poetry, and then 5 years later they're going, oh well, no one knows me and no one's seen my work, and how come my first book isn't the Iliad or something? What's going on? So I'm really glad that that's kind of come about. I've talked to a few people that run presses, and they're saying that yeah, we've seen a lot of people at colleges just either the do it yourself aesthetic, or some people their age are kind of starting their own little imprints just to kind of get stuff out there because it's really hard, with MySpace, Facebook, Instagram. I think a lot of music and Bandcamp, all these avenues for music is really kind of come along. And I'm kind of glad, it seems like a lot of people have their own website and people are learning about web design and stuff, and that's great too. But nothing beats live because the personality doesn't come through, a website unless it's a video. And even
Yeah.
then, you're not there live at the event. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
No, I think that, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I agree. Yeah, and it is nice to see chapbooks coming back. I know that back in the day, before this, what I hope is a temporary drought, people would bring their chapbooks to their reading, and then they'd say, "Hey, if you like those, I've got like 7 others that I didn't read here today or tonight, and you can find them in the book. And here, $5, and you get my chapbook, or whatever the price may be." So yeah, that is good. And another important thing is that beyond do it yourself, which I think is great. I mean, we were talking about the classic poets. Well, I found out that Shelley began as a do it yourself. He printed his own poems in the form of broadsides and sold them for a few pennies or shillings or whatever the currency was back then. And that's how he started before he actually had a book. But yeah, at any rate, in terms of small presses, these are the presses that are actually taking chances and publishing cutting edge works, or publishing risky work.
Right.
Uh, largely because they don't have a tremendous overhead. They don't have shareholders that they have to satisfy. The bottom line is important so that they can just go on publishing, but they don't expect to get rich. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, the $1 million
They
poetry
want to
industry.
survive, but they aren't interested in getting rich. They want to survive and they want to bring you good poetry. And the reason that they want to continue they want the press to live is because they want to keep publishing, period. Not to become rich and famous, publish a bestseller or anything like that. So small presses are definitely the place to look for new, original, and cutting edge work.
Well, yeah, and I think a thing that is often overlooked that people, I don't know why they forget, but these presses are started and run by people who are first and foremost fans.
Mm-hmm.
Fans of just, writing and poetry in general. And they have friends that can't get over in a zine, or they can't get over and they can't afford to get out their own chapbook or book. And so they're just saying, like, send me 3 poems, I'll pick one and I'll put it in this, anthology, and we'll go to FedEx and we'll do the old fashioned 9x12 with the 2 or 3 staples, and we'll have a friend do the artwork and
Mm-hmm.
do a run of 100 and hope we sell them all. I mean, I remember those days, and they were not that long ago, and those were great.
Yeah.
Well, believe it or not, we've almost run out of time here, but I want to give you a chance to plug your websites. I know you've got some stuff online, so just let people know where they can find your work.
Well, I do a podcast called Poet Runner. The co-host is Rafael Alvarado. I interview the poet for 30 minutes, and then Rafael interviews a marathon runner for the last 30 minutes. And he's, of course, also a poet himself. And that's in Blog Talk Radio. So if you go to the Blog Talk Radio site, you can find that. I don't have a website. I have some poems in some online journals. Heroin Love Songs .20 is one, and I can't think of the other ones, but they're scattered here and there.
But I know you've got some things up on YouTube. I don't know if you yourself had a YouTube channel or.
No, I don't. If I'm on YouTube, it was posted by somebody else.
But I mean, because I found stuff, so I know that there are other interviews with you. There are clips of you reading your work around town. So if people want to find your work, I mean, are the anthologies available on Amazon that you've got coming out?
Well, the anthologies, again, this is one of the things that I would recommend. Most of these publishers have their own websites, and you can buy them directly from the publisher. So Beat Not Beat is published by Moontide Press.
Oh, cool.
And so you can buy the book directly from Moontide Press, from their website, or from your local independent bookstore. And then if you can't find it, if they've run out at Moontide, which I doubt, and you can't find it at your local independent bookstore, then you can go to Amazon. But generally, quite frankly, I recommend Amazon as a last resort. If you can't find it anywhere else, then go to them. But
fair enough. Well, thank you so much for being on the show and everything that you do for everybody in the community. I mean, you've just been a huge supporter for everybody's work over the years, and nothing but nice things to say, and looking forward to the new book when it comes out.
Well, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me on, and I enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
You too.
Bye now.